Well, I guess it didn't come back in time, so this is going to be a two-part video. So BYU, the drifting, slipping, and seepage. This is part two. So I was talking about my personal experience. Head's getting a little bit hot. So open up the window. So what happened is second semester at BYU, I was taking Biology 100 with William Bradshaw, and I can't remember the other professor, but he believed in evolution. He was a mission president in Hong Kong, and gave a talk on it. And I remember some people getting up and leaving. Now I wouldn't do that unless you had to go to the bathroom or there's an emergency. He has a son or a relative who's LGBTQ, so he's active in LGBTQ things. And he gave a talk about it, so we applauded and cheered. And as you're navigating things, you always can get swayed by a charismatic professor. So that was an interesting experience to hear that. And I remember talking with a friend of mine, and a friend of mine didn't believe that you had a professor who believed in evolution teaching at BYU. And he said, "Oh yeah, they're all vetted," but so it was. So I went on my mission, came back in 1992. There it goes. Sorry, one of the lights is getting a little bit dim. And they're having questions about academic freedom at BYU, and that's what prompted Robert Millett to give his BYU as a Covenant Community talk. But also, too, there is another trend going on. Brother Millett was a very activist professor. He was very energized. It was an exciting time to be at BYU with him, Truman Madsen, Hugh Nibley. It was a golden age. But another time is what happened. You have these a lot of questions about church doctrine. So what you do is at the BYU library before the remodel, you go up to the fourth floor, the information desk. So the fourth floor had the history books and then the religion books there. So I'd spend a lot of time there with calling as a Sunday school teacher, my degree in history. But at the desk, they have what were called hot topics. They had questions about evolution, abortion, birth control. And so the library had this stack of quotes, or I think they're laminated. So you go there, ask them, they'd hand them to you. You could look at them, photocopy them, return them. And so what happened, there's a question about evolution at BYU. And so they came up with something called the BYU Evolution Packet. And I got it around here somewhere, but I won't dig it up. I think you can still dig it. They have a really bad formatted form. If you can find the PDF of it, the original one, it's really good. And so what happened is, in order to settle questions, they said, okay, if you have questions about evolution, here's the two first presidency statements, the entry from the Encyclopedia of Incorrect Name of the Church, Mormonism, the M word, and then another statement. And said, okay, this is what the church says, and professors were instructed, okay, this is what you hand out if people have questions of evolution. So later on, I think this was in 1993, maybe 1994, I as an elective class, I took a ancient life forms class. So you understand how the elective goes, to give you a broad liberal education. So I took a class from Professor Morris Peterson. And at a certain point, we're discussing it. So he handed out copies of The Earth and Man by James E. Talmage. Well, see what it is. Now, I took it and I read it. I still have the copy of it these years later, because I think it's important, as a university, to read this just as a historian. Okay, here's a general authority who is a geologist talking about evolution. But really, the instructions from the Board of Trustees is don't send out other stuff, use the evolution packet. And so my professor was disobeying it to get his agenda out. Now, it wasn't catastrophic, but it was an impropriety. And this is something that comes up. Even, you remember a number of years ago, President Henry B. Eyring talking about how his father wrote an article for a church magazine called The Age of the Earth. And that's something that goes on, but really... like I said, I took it, I read it. I mean, there's ways to get it out. For example, he could have copies at his office saying, oh, it's here if you're curious. But it was an impropriety to do this instead of the evolution packet, which was directed by the Board of Trustees. It's interesting about evolution is Brigham Young was opposed to it. Discourses of Brigham Young talks about lizard, the time when we're all lizards. And he tried it as Brigham Young was setting up these academies, and he had what was called Young Academy of Salt Lake. Now, this sometimes gets confused with the Brigham Young Academy here in Provo, but Hugh Nibley did that, but it's not. However, it's the same principle. So at Young's Academy in Salt Lake City, this is a book called Letters from Brigham Young to His Sons. He said, the academy will be open to the children of the Latter-day Saints only. In it, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and other works of the church will be standard textbooks. The preceptors will be especially enjoined to install in the minds of our youth a faith in the religion of their fathers. We have enough and to spare at present in these mountains of schools where young infidels are made because the teachers are so tender-footed they dare not mention principles of the gospel to their pupils. Once again, that squeamishness, that fear, that cowardice, that zeal you lost from your mission. But have no hesitancy in introducing into the classroom the theories of Huxley, Darwin, or Edward Meall, and the false political economy which contends against the cooperation of the United Order. They say what he's saying, what Brigham Young's saying is this whole Darwin thing, that's the anti-United Order. Huxley, Karl Marx, that's anti-United Order. So this is a serious thing. It's not just evolution. We're talking about it's anti-gospel. So this gets personal. I'm not going to name names. I've named names previously, but I'm not going to name names. But this gets into the seepage aspect of it. So I had a bishop who was a BYU professor. I was serving as financial clerk. And I got called by a previous bishop. As you go, clerks, you stay in there. They don't bother to ask you if there's a problem. They just ignore you. Yes, I've had some bad experiences with that. And so you get stuck there having to train a new bishop. And he wants things to go a certain way and said, I'm sorry, I can't. Well, the new bishop didn't have a budget. And I can't, as a financial clerk, I don't know how it is now, but when I was doing it, you couldn't track spending. So I had to report this to the stake president. So he got a budget out. And then later he was doing some funny things with welfare that, I don't know if this is right or wrong. It just didn't feel right to me because you're prolonging and avoiding dealing with a problem. So with welfare, you'd have we'd write checks to one of the couples. When they maxed out, we'd start writing checks out in the name of the other couple to avoid the limit that the church puts on. And that didn't feel right with me, but you went on with that. Later on, he wanted a report, and for some reason, he believed that these reports should go back 5 years. Now, they didn't. They only went back 3 years. So I printed out the report, said it only goes back for 3 years. I gave it to him. Then a couple weeks later, he got kind of forcible with me as he wanted this for 5 years. So how we arbitrated this is that I had him, he emailed the stake financial clerk who said, yeah, these reports only go back for 3 years just because you don't want to create long-term dependency. I did not have the shrewdness at the time, but because I didn't understand what he was doing, but I think what he was doing is he wanted to be a lot more generous with the church funds, and the church wasn't allowing him, and he was having a proxy battle with the church with me, because there's, like I said, there's some stuff I just couldn't do because the computer wouldn't allow it. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and like I said, this is a BYU professor not following the church's standards on finances. Later, I was at the same time I was serving as on the stake singles committee, and there's just massive amounts of turnover with it. And for some reason, I just didn't turn over. And what happened one time is we're meeting on the last Sunday of the month. So in the meeting, I suggested, well, next Sunday is Fast Sunday. Why don't we include a fast for the singles? So the counselor of the stake presidency, who was also a BYU professor, sat there, didn't say anything. Member of the High Council sat there, didn't say anything. And his wife, the wife of the High Counselor, who's also part of the committee, didn't say anything. When someone asked to fast for them, I'm not telling the full story, like I said, they sit there. They didn't answer the question because you could tell it was cognitive dissonance. The limbic system versus the prefrontal cortex. They knew this, they wanted to do this, but for some reason, they thought that I was supposed to be a gopher, implement what they were doing. I don't know exactly what it was. I have some suspicions, but it's one of the dead silence. So it's what we call a pocket veto. But so I have a bishop who's not handling finances correctly, and then the accounts from the presidency, he wouldn't fast for single people, even though he is tasked with that. That was his assignment. And both BYU professors, so this is part of the seepage that I'm going to talk about. So what happened, Judge Thomas Griffith, so just as a disclaimer, he was my stake president for a bit, and that's part of the reason why I pay attention to him. So on August 31st, 2023, he had this article in the Deseret News, and I think this is a speech he also gave at Stanford University, quoting Judge Brother Griffith, quote, "Constitutional law scholar Derek Webb explored what Washington meant by a brilliant article that points out the delegates to the convention exhibited not only a civility in their debates, a good first step, but more important, they were willing to set aside parochial interest, come to a compromise, and in some instances even give cherished liberties for the sake of unities. In other words, the miracle of Philadelphia was not a deus ex machina. It came about only because people made an effort to understand one another, and they're willing to give up some of the things they valued dearly for the sake of unity. This is the roadmap for overcoming division, for achieving the miracle." Now that's interesting. That's a bit of a weasel word. That he said, okay, well, the miracle of Philadelphia wasn't a miracle, but it was a miracle. And that's like the Roberts ruling on the Affordable Care Act. And later on, in July 4th, 2025, so this is 2 years later, they had this article called, "Are We in a Moment of Crisis? The phrase constitutional crisis is everywhere, but is it accurate?" Quoting Judge Griffith again, quote, "By July 1787, it appeared that the whole of the convention would fail. No agreement had been reached, and there was serious talk of delegates leaving for home. And yet by September, the delegates had cobbled together a constitution. So unlikely was this turn of events that one popular history of the convention is titled, quote, 'Miracle at Philadelphia.' I am a Christian," says Judge Griffith, "and I believe in miracles, but my understanding is that a miracle is an event that defies rational explanation, such as parting of the waves during the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt or the resurrection of Jesus. By this definition, no miracle took place in the summer of 1787. No miracle took place in the summer of 1787. We know exactly how delegates succeeded because George Washington told us. In a letter transmitting the proposed Constitution to Congress, Washington wrote, "The Constitution which we now present is the result of a spirit of amity and that of mutual deference and concession, which the peculiarity of our political situation rendered indispensable." Amity, mutual deference, concession. The delegates in Philadelphia practiced these virtues for the sake of creating a more perfect union. Once again, you can see the problem is it's a definitional one. That, okay, is this a miracle or isn't? And like I said, the first quote from 2023, well, the miracle was just normal things. But this is what Joseph Fielding Smith said. The miracle wasn't a miracle, but then it was a miracle. Joseph Fielding Smith, he wrote, and this is in the Joseph Fielding Smith manual, "The words of the prophets are rapidly being fulfilled, but it's done on such natural principles that most of us fail to see it." And really what the miracle is that he used these principles of amity and concession, but you can still follow those principles and fail. You ever serve a mission, someone who kept all the rules and was obedient and came home empty-handed? That's a good example because you can use these principles, but the miracle is God blessing you as you do this. Same thing in finances or time management. Sometimes you do get overwhelmed. You can keep the word of wisdom, Spencer W. Kimball, Howard W. Hunter. You can keep these principles and still they don't actually succeed, and it's still ignoring the divine intervention. So I'm always open to clarification on this matter, but I think the using in the first quote is where he says this isn't a miracle, but it was is a problem. It's the amphibole. And this leads to the last part about the seepage aspect. The effect of this drifting and this shifting and sliding at BYU, that affects the whole church. Because you think about the people who went through BYU during the slippage. Like I said, it's been going on as long as I've been part of BYU as a student and as an alumnus. You have the alumni corps, but you also have what's on BYU TV that transmits the drifting and sliding. Education Week is a vehicle for slipping and sliding and infecting members. Desert Book Publications, Time Out for Woman, social media posts. These professors who are slipping and sliding and drifting, that gets relayed and normalized. Well, church runs BYU. You have the countless papers, like I quoted, speeches, symposia, colloquia, church callings, like I was explaining with the bishop and counselor in the stake presidency. These are people called as stake presidents and mission presidents. So they have the drifting and slipping, and it carries on. So go on about those who saw it. There were people like me who saw this drift, and we spoke up. And what happened to us? The response was, well, the brethren are watching over BYU. Well, my favorite podcaster said, all is well in Zion, all is well at BYU. Well, I read this book that's published by Deseret Book and is written by a BYU professor, and they have a filtering process. So maybe you're the one who's wrong. You're the one who's criticizing the brethren. If you spoke up about this drift, were you silenced or were you given a talking to? Did you get released from your calling? But Elder Gilbert just validated every concern and every feeling you have. You have that Keeping Faith at BYU Instagram account, which tracked things, and that was a catalyst for change. Here's something else. This is half facetious, half real. Can you sue BYU Provo for fraud or breach of contract? For example, you enroll in BYU, and the understanding is you'll get a education that supports the church, but you have your professors who are constantly downgrading the family proclamation. So you get corrupted in the process, and then teaching stuff that's contrary to the original chart and the aims of the BYU education, when they're criticizing the church and criticizing the brethren. Can you sue the church for breach of contract? It's like, hey, look, you're supposed to get a education that's supportive of the church, and you're criticizing the brethren. That's clearly a breach of contract. So think about that. Another argument would be, as you start producing students who are critical of the church, that professors criticize that and they infect students, that degrades my degree. That's right, I have standing is like the value of my BYU degree gets degraded as people start graduating and losing their testimony and become critics of the church. So, 18 minutes. Part of this is going to be a little bit short. I just had to cut the break, had to take care of the matter. Said President Oaks earlier this month, BYU will become the great university of the Lord. Not in the Lord's way, but not in the world's way, but the Lord's way. BYU will become the great university of the Lord, not in the world's way, but in the Lord's way. I think that's interesting because we've been talking about this for 50 years. At least as long as I've been associated and intensively associated with BYU, but it's always in prolepsis. At some point in the future, BYU will grasp its destiny. But what's holding the dial back? What's holding us back now? Why are we constantly oscillating? Like I said, all these quotes in the first segment I quoted. That's something to think about. So what is to be done? How do you advance the dial? How do you move the ball? First of all, is recognize the problem. And don't silence someone who's pointing out this problem. The second thing is to trust the brethren. In a temporal sense, they're privy to data, determining data that I don't have access to. They have the enveloping mantle of seership, something that I don't have access to, and so you just have to take the action of faith. A third thing is to remember the allegory of the olive tree. The allegory of the olive tree. Don't podcast when you're tongue-tied. It has to be right. So the allegory of the olive tree. For agree with me that I should lose the trees of my vineyard. Wherefore Ye shall clear away the bad according as the good shall grow, that the root and the top may be equal in strength, until the good shall overcome the bad, and the bad be hewn down and cast into fire, that they cumber not the ground of my vineyard. And thus will I sweep away the bad out of the vineyard. And that's Jacob 5:66. So pruning the banyan tree of BYU, it'll take time. That you are going to have to let contracts expire. Question is, where are you going to get these good professors who stand up and will follow the church's standards at BYU? They just don't come out of anywhere, nowhere. There's no magician's hat where you, okay, here's the faithful BYU professor. And this has to be done incrementally, else you could kill BYU by forcing all the people to resign at once and destroy the university. It raises the question too of accreditation. Are we doing the wrong thing to getting accreditation? So the next thing is that alumni must speak up. Of course, BYU is unique in that the board of trustees are seers, and sometimes we, as alumni, kneel before the priesthood keys in obedience. But as an alumni, I think you have an obligation to speak up. William F. Buckley's God and Man at Yale is a good read. There you go. So prune, but don't kill the banyan tree. And just lastly, keep about the foundation stone fallacy of questioning the family proclamation and the prime puzzle that people thought Elder Holland was telling people to shoot people. That's just bizarre. There's no way you can. The whole thought process is just absolutely strange. It's kooky. But people honestly believed it. I think it was a bit of a Freudian slip, because you remember the conservatives are the one that are getting shot at. Donald Trump's 3 assassination attempts, and of course Charlie Kirk at a university getting assassinated. Freudian slip. So my voice is giving out. News blips, the epic fury, Trump bombing Mexico. We're getting our military spread thin. The Cuban ship shooting, and don't do tongue twisters. You can tell my voice is giving out right now. Clinton's and Epstein. Clinton, for a Yale graduate, she has a surprising lapses of memory. She can't remember nothing. There's a Rush Limbaugh parody song about it. Paul Shanklin tried to remember. With Bill Clinton, it's hard to keep in mind that this young generation weren't alive during the Lewinsky thing, bimbo eruption. They see Clinton as an elder statesman and not as a lecher, as a sexual harasser. Part of the reason is because feminists gave him permission. Feminists gave him a pass. State of the Union, that was a turnaround for the ages. I think that's the poll quote. You remember Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech, Mamdani, and the snow removal. Another thing is the first duty of American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. The camera panned, and the Democrats would not stand up. We can't come to an agreement that the duty of the American government is to protect citizens, not illegal aliens, and that's a division. That's a great division, at least politically, which way your head's turned. This is a non-negotiable. Debanking. J.P. Morgan concedes it closed Trump's accounts after January 6th. That's absolutely evil. America 250. I do not have the voice to do this. Patrick Henry's Liberty or Death speech. Mr. President, it's natural for man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We're apt to shut our eyes against painful truth and listen to the song of that siren until she transforms us into beast. I have but one lamp to guide my feet, and that is the lamp of experience. Patrick Henry. Suffer yourself not to be betrayed with a kiss. What have we to oppose to them? Shall we try argument? Sir, we've been trying that for the last 10 years. Have we anything new to offer upon the subject? Nothing. We held the subject up in every light which is capable, but it still has all been in vain. Shall we resort to entreaty and to humble supplication? What terms shall we find which have not been already exhausted? Let us not, I beseech you, sir, deceive ourselves. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Our petitions have been slighted. Our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult. Our supplications have been disregarded. We have been spurned with contempt from that foot of the throne. There's no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we wish to mean preserve and violate those the inestimable privileges for which we have so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle which we have so long engaged, which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat again, we must fight, and appeal to the arms and to God of hosts is all that is left to us. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be next week or next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed? When a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely upon our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies shall have us bound hand and foot? There's a just God who presides over the destinies of nations. It is vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, to be as we purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course the others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death. Back in 1998, Elder Richard G. Scott gave a talk at BYU. And this is the year of Clinton's impeachment, the Lewinsky affair. Back to the previous comment about Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. And it's called Learning to Succeed in Life. But at the beginning, he discussed Bill Clinton. So replace Bill Clinton with Donald Trump. President Clinton has made declarations of incorrect decisions in his personal life. What is proper for him and others who have responsibility to act to do? What should you and I do about it? And I'm not placing myself in a position to exert judgment on those already deeply involved in the matter. I also do want to point out what I understand the Lord has said and what the laws of this nation requires. Learning from this experience can be of great personal benefit in helping make correct decisions in life. And he talked about it, said, look, some of this is up to him and his wife. But I give that a read. Give Patrick Henry's speech a read. Life some pointers. Do I AI risk assessment on your job? Is your job at risk for artificial intelligence, robotics, and quantum computing? And if it is, what's your career move? AI risk assessment. E-devotional is the president released an Easter message. I don't have it in me to talk. This has gone on for 2 parts. So celebrate Easter. Be grateful for America. Read Patrick Henry's speech. If you're at BYU, give the foundational documents a look. Reassess it. If you have issues with the family proclamation, think about why. Kick it into your prefrontal cortex. And that's the passing scene with the eyes of faith.